On my 68th birthday, I found a package sitting neatly on my porch. No return address, no cheerful wrapping paper, no ribbon, just a plain box, taped shut, with my name written in a hand I would have known anywhere. I carried it inside, the weight of it too deliberate to be ordinary. I set it down on the kitchen table and ran my fingers across the cardboard, tracing the handwriting that had once scribbled thank you notes in crooked lines and scrawled messy grocery lists when I was too tired to write them myself. Daniel, my son. 3 years of silence, broken not by words but by the slant of blue ink on a brown box. I wanted to tell myself it could be anyone, but my bones knew better. His hand had a way of leaning too hard on the downstrokes, like he was pressing his weight into the paper. Even after years apart, I felt the sting of recognition. I slit the tape with the edge of a butter knife. Inside was a wooden case polished dark and heavy, the kind you display on a shelf rather than tuck into a cabinet. I lifted the lid. Nestled inside was a bottle of whiskey, emerald glass with gold lettering curling across the label. It caught the morning light like it had swallowed fire. The wax seal on the cork gleamed smooth and perfect. A bottle that cost more than I ever spent on groceries in a week. Something rare, something chosen. For me. But there was no note. Not one that mattered. Just a plain white card, taped to the side, with 2 words scrawled across it. Happy birthday. No mom. Not even a signature. As if writing my title had become too heavy a burden for his pen. My chest tightened. Gifts should carry warmth, or at least recognition. This one carried silence, sharpened and wrapped in glass. I sat at the table and turned the bottle slowly in my hands. Whiskey used to mean comfort to me. Once. Evenings with Martin, my late husband, when we'd sit on the back porch swing after dinner and let the crickets fill the silence between us. 1 glass each. His hand warm over mine as we talked about everything and nothing. That was before the heart attack. Before the doctor listed the forbidden things. Fried food, heavy salt, red meat, whiskey. I had given it all up with the kind of determination a woman summons when life itself is the prize. I hadn't touched a drop in nearly a decade. Daniel had been at the hospital when the doctor laid it out, his eyes fixed on his phone, thumbs moving. I told myself he was trying to distract himself. Now I wasn't so sure. The whiskey sat in front of me like a question I hadn't asked for. Was this meant as peace? Or provocation? A gift? Or a reminder of all I had lost? I poured myself another cup of coffee instead, the kind that tasted burnt by the time I remembered it. The smell of onions and carrots still lingered in the kitchen from last night's stew. It was the kind of meal meant to be shared, though I ate it alone. My thoughts drifted to Margaret Ellis. Margaret, with her easy laugh and habit of filling her house with people, casseroles, and music. She was Claire's mother, my daughter-in-law's anchor, the kind of woman who never arrived at my door without something in her hands. A pie, a scarf, fresh herbs from her garden. She had once told me her guilty pleasure was a glass of fine whiskey in the evening. Not cheap stuff, but the kind you opened when you wanted to savor something special. I looked at the bottle again. To me it was temptation wrapped in danger. To her, it could be joy. I thought about it gathering dust on my shelf, unopened, fading behind glass, and the thought felt wrong. If anyone deserved something fine, it was Margaret. She'd know how to give it a story. She'd open it at her table, pour it for friends, laugh while the amber liquid caught the light. By late afternoon, the decision was made. The bottle was buckled into the passenger seat of my old Chevy, strapped in like it was a passenger I didn't entirely trust. The October sun slanted low across the road, fields cut down to stubble, the air carrying the faint tang of smoke from someone's burn pile. My heart thudded harder than usual as I drove, not from the climb of a hill, but from the weight of what I was carrying. A message in a bottle, though not the kind you wanted to open. When I pulled into Margaret's drive, her white house stood steady on its rise, wraparound porch glowing in the amber light. She opened the door before I could knock, a flannel shawl around her shoulders, her eyes quick to notice what I held. "Alicia," she said, surprise softening into curiosity. "From Daniel," I told her, offering the bottle. Her eyebrows rose, but she took it gently, turning it so the label glimmered. "It's beautiful." she said. Then make tonight special, I answered. And for the first time in years, I felt the smallest flicker of relief. Better in her hands than in mine. Better turned into a memory than left to fester as a reminder. But even as I drove away, the sunset spilling across the dashboard, I couldn't shake the silence from Daniel's card. 2 words. Happy birthday. A gift that looked like generosity but felt like warning. I told myself not everything needed a reason, but deep down, I knew better. That night I couldn't sleep. The whiskey had left its shadow in the kitchen, even though the bottle was gone from my house. I sat at the table long after the dishes were washed, my coffee cooling in front of me, staring at the place where the wooden case had been. It was as if the air still carried its weight. Memories rose whether I wanted them or not. Evenings on the porch swing with Martin, the summer cicadas humming, his hand resting over mine, both of us holding small tumblers filled with amber light. Whiskey had meant warmth then, a fire you could hold without burning. Those nights had carried laughter, the kind that didn't need to be loud to be alive. But time is a thief. First it took Martin, sudden and merciless. Then it took the rituals we shared, leaving me alone with the silence of an empty swing and a doctor's orders that outlawed what had once been comfort. I gave up the whiskey as if I was handing back part of myself, and I thought that sacrifice had been enough to keep me standing. But Daniel hadn't seen it that way. My son drifted away, slowly at first, then all at once. One missed Sunday dinner turned into 5. A Christmas left unanswered by phone calls. Birthdays where only silence filled the mailbox. The excuses grew thinner than paper, busy with work, out of town, too tired. Then nothing at all. I kept setting a place for him, year after year, until the waiting became unbearable. I stopped. It was easier to cook for one than to pretend for 2. Still, the ache stayed. The house creaked as I moved to the living room, the floorboards knowing the weight of my steps after decades. I lowered myself into Martin's old armchair, the one seat that still seemed to hold his shape. The lamp cast a warm glow, but it only deepened the shadows in the corners. Silence pressed against me, heavy and close. I was learning that silence had sharp edges. It could cut deeper than words. Daniel's absence was that kind of silence. Steady, unrelenting, a wound that never healed. When the phone rang, I nearly dropped the receiver. The sound was too sudden, too loud, shattering the fragile quiet. I pressed it to my ear, my voice tight. Hello? Happy birthday, Mom. His voice, smooth, casual, as if 3 years hadn't passed since the last time I'd heard it. He didn't even sound winded, though my chest tightened as though I'd been running. I wanted to savor the words, but they carried a chill. Too practiced, too even. A line rehearsed. Daniel, I said, his name catching in my throat. He chuckled lightly, though it didn't reach me. You get my gift? I hesitated. I did. That's a rare bottle, he went on. Figured you'd appreciate it. Did you try it yet? The question slipped out like silk, but there was an edge beneath, something watchful. My fingers tightened around the phone cord. I forced my voice steady. I don't drink anymore. I gave it to Margaret. For a moment, nothing. The kind of silence that wasn't empty but loaded, brimming with something unsaid. I could hear him breathing, faint, steady, too measured. Seconds stretched longer than they should have. I almost spoke just to fill the gap, but something told me not to. Finally, he exhaled. Margaret, he repeated, slowly, like turning a stone in his hand. Then, softer, well, hope she enjoys it. His tone was flat, stripped of warmth, like a door closing. I thought it was better she had it, I said, though I didn't know why I was explaining myself. He didn't answer right away. That pause again. Long enough for me to feel the walls tighten, for the air to thicken, then a light laugh, too thin to be real. Makes sense, he said. Anyway, good to hear your voice. The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at the receiver in my hand, listening to the hollow buzz. My pulse was high, though I hadn't moved. That pause, those seconds where he said nothing, rattled in my chest like stones in a jar. Silence shouldn't have weight, but his did. It was heavier than any words he might have spoken. I set the phone down gently, as if it might shatter. The lamp hummed faintly, the clock ticked too loud, and the air in the room felt altered, charged. His call should have been comfort after years of distance. Instead, it left me with a prickle at the back of my neck, an unease I couldn't shake. Daniel had remembered my birthday. He had sent a gift. He had called. And yet nothing about it felt like love. It felt like a warning disguised as kindness, a shadow disguised as light. I told myself I was being foolish, letting old wounds color the moment. But deep inside, I knew better. Something had shifted. Something had begun. The phone rang at 6:17 a.m., a sound that split the morning in two. I had just poured hot water over my tea leaves, steam curling into the chill of the kitchen. At that hour, calls never bring good news. My hand trembled as I reached for the receiver, dread settling in before I even lifted it. Alicia, the voice on the line rasped, rushed, breathless. It was Howard, Margaret's husband. It's Margaret, she collapsed last night. They rushed her to County General. The doctors think, his voice cracked, steadied, then broke again. They think it was poison. For a moment, I couldn't answer. My mouth opened, but the words refused to move. The sound of his grief bled through the line, every syllable thick with fear. My eyes fixed on the clock above the sink, its second hand sweeping forward with cruel indifference. Poison. The word filled the room like smoke. Margaret, who had opened her door to me a dozen times with laughter, who had pressed herbs into my hands, who had taken that bottle of whiskey with gratitude. It was Margaret lying in a hospital bed now. I gripped the counter with my free hand to keep from swaying. My tea went cold beside me. Howard, I whispered. How bad is it? They're running tests. She's stable, for now, but they say something in her system. Something toxic. He drew a breath ragged as torn cloth. She took a small drink, Alicia. Just a small one after dinner. She said it burned different, that the taste was strange. Then she fell. My vision narrowed, black creeping at the edges. I saw the bottle in my mind, green glass catching the light, the golden script curling like a trap. I thought of Daniel's voice, smooth and deliberate, asking if I had tried it. I thought of the pause when I told him I'd given it to Margaret, the silence that had pressed against me, thick and suffocating. He knew. Howard's voice broke again. They're asking if she could have eaten anything unusual. But I know my wife. She cooked the same roast she's made for years. Nothing different. I pressed the receiver to my ear so tightly it hurt. My thoughts raced, colliding, breaking apart. If Margaret had been poisoned, if that bottle carried more than whiskey, then I had placed it in her hands. My decision. My choice. The weight of it crushed me. Howard, I said, forcing calm into my tone. I'll come to the hospital. No, he answered quickly. Stay. I'll call you when we know more. Just pray for her. His voice cracked. Then the line went dead. I set the phone down with deliberate care, though my hands shook. My reflection stared back at me from the darkened kitchen window, pale, eyes wide, a woman suddenly older than her years. I leaned both palms on the counter, fighting to breathe, the air too thin to fill my lungs. Poison. Margaret's laughter. Margaret's shawl around her shoulders. Margaret opening her door with warmth. Flashes of her life collided with the image of her lying still, machines counting her breaths, and me, the hand that delivered the bottle. I walked back to the table, lowering myself into the chair, as though my body had turned to stone. My eyes fell to the corner, to the small jar where I had poured a taste of the whiskey for myself, a sample I had never touched. The liquid caught the faint morning light. My stomach clenched. Had I lifted it to my lips, I would have joined her in that hospital bed, or worse. The thought froze me. The silence of the house deepened, pressing in with new weight. Every creak of wood, every tick of the clock seemed to accuse. Daniel's handwriting on the package rose before me, the heavy strokes that had always marked his pen, the two words on the card. Happy birthday. My hand rose to my chest, pressing against the old scar of my heart's betrayal. He knew I couldn't drink, knew my history, knew the doctor's warnings, and still, he had sent it. No, not still because of it. The steam from my tea had vanished entirely, the cup stone cold. I reached for it anyway, desperate for something steady to hold. my fingers wrapped around the porcelain as though it might anchor me. The house felt unfamiliar, the safety of my walls stripped bare. I thought of Daniel as a boy, his laughter as he ran across the yard, the way he once clung to my hand at crowded fairs. Then the memory twisted, shifting into the man on the phone, voice smooth, silence deliberate, asking if I had tried the whiskey. The room tilted around me. My breaths came shallow. I closed my eyes, and the truth settled heavy in my bones. The gift had not been meant for celebration. It had been meant for me. Margaret had simply taken my place. And if she didn't survive, then my silence, my trust, my blind hope in the face of Daniel's distance would be the rope that had tightened around her throat. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. My body dozed in fits, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw Margaret's face, pale and still under hospital lights, and the green glass of that bottle gleaming in my kitchen like a loaded gun I'd passed along. By dawn, I gave up on rest and turned to cleaning. I needed the order of it, the comfort of wiping surfaces, folding towels, taking back some control of a house that suddenly felt foreign. The trash bag under the sink was full, so I pulled it free, tying it with quick, sharp motions. That's when I saw it, something small, glinting at the bottom, tucked between eggshells and coffee grounds. I bent closer, heart thudding, and pulled it out with trembling fingers. A vial. Glass, no label, no markings, just a faint dusting of white residue clinging inside like frost on a window. It was so ordinary in its shape, so sinister in its presence. My breath caught. I hadn't seen it before, and I knew I hadn't put it there. The kitchen swam around me as I held it up to the light. Whoever left this behind wanted it hidden, buried in my trash, as if the evidence would vanish with the garbage truck. But they had miscalculated. My hands shook as I set it on the counter, staring as though it might speak. Margaret in the hospital, doctors whispering about poison, Daniel's too smooth voice asking if I had tried the whiskey threads pulled together into a knot that choked me. Then I remembered. The jar. 2 nights ago, curiosity or perhaps an old ghost of habit had driven me to pour a sample of the whiskey into a mason jar, just enough for a taste. I had set it on the shelf, telling myself maybe later, though my heart warned me against it. Later never came. The jar was still there, untouched, sealed, sitting in plain sight like a witness waiting to be called. My pulse surged. That jar could hold the truth, the difference between suspicion and certainty. I wiped my hands on a towel, forced myself to steady, and reached for the phone. There was only one person I could trust with, this someone who owed nothing to Daniel, nothing to me beyond old friendship. Dr. Karen Holt. We had shared cramped dorm rooms and late-night study sessions decades ago. Now she ran a small research lab, quiet but thorough, the kind of place where questions found answers without unnecessary attention. Her voice on the line was brisk but warm. Alicia? It's been too long. I swallowed hard, forcing steadiness into mine. Karen, I need your help, and I need you not to ask too many questions until I explain. She hesitated only a beat before agreeing. I told her about the bottle, the hospital, the vial, my untouched jar. She grew quiet, the way scientists do when they know the weight of what they're about to uncover. Bring it, she said finally, discreetly. By mid-morning, I was standing in the shadowed corridor of her lab, the jar and vial wrapped carefully in brown paper, tucked under my arm like contraband. She met me at the back door, her white coat already on, eyes sharp with curiosity and concern. This way, she said, ushering me into a small side room filled with humming machines and glassware that caught the light. I watched as she worked, her movements practiced, precise. She scraped the residue from the vial, drew a sample from the whiskey in the jar, ran them both through equipment whose names I no longer remembered but whose authority I trusted. The hum of the machines was steady, relentless, like a clock ticking toward revelation. Minutes stretched into hours. I stood with my hands clasped, my body taut as wire. Finally, Karen turned, holding a printout, her face grave. It's there, she said. White snake root, Eupatorium rugosum, a toxin, highly lethal in sufficient dose. Even in small amounts, it can damage the heart, the liver. It explains everything you told me. Her words dropped like stones in my chest. White snake root. I'd read of it in passing. Pioneer families losing cattle when they grazed on it. Milk sickness killing mothers and children before anyone knew the cause. And now it had found its way into a whiskey bottle on my kitchen table. A weapon delivered with my son's handwriting on the box. Karen's eyes searched mine. This isn't an accident, Alicia. Someone extracted and concentrated this. Someone meant harm. She didn't say what I already knew. Didn't speak Daniel's name. She didn't have to. I nodded, my throat dry, my heart hammering against the cage of my ribs. The truth was no longer a suspicion, no longer a whisper in the dark. It was written in chemical codes, in the certainty of science. The bottle had carried poison. The vial was its companion, and the hand that sent it was one I had once held as a boy. His house felt nothing like a home. Cold angles, glass that gleamed too clean, metal that caught no warmth. Even the air inside seemed filtered, stripped of scent or memory. I stepped across the threshold and felt the absence. No photographs on the walls, no books bent at the spine, no evidence of a life lived, only arranged. Daniel appeared in the doorway to the living room, his smile polite but empty, the kind you offer strangers you don't intend to see again. "Mom," he said smoothly, as though the words still belonged to him. "Didn't think you'd actually come." I studied him in the light, his hair sharper at the edges, his suit cut too slim for comfort, his eyes calculating even when his lips curved upward. He looked at me like I was an unexpected bill, something to be dealt with, not welcomed. I forced my shoulders straight, my tone steady. "I thought we should talk, Daniel." My purse strap pressed against my palm, my thumb brushing the small recorder hidden inside. Karen's voice echoed in my head. "This isn't an accident, Alicia. Someone meant harm. The weight of truth was too heavy to carry alone. I needed more than suspicion. I needed his own words." He gestured toward the sofa, a piece of furniture that looked like it had never been sat on. I stayed standing. "You gave the whiskey to Margaret," he said, not asked. His tone was flat, precise. My pulse jumped. He shouldn't have known that. I hadn't told him where it had gone, only that I hadn't kept it. His eyes flicked over me, measuring my reaction. "I didn't think it was right for me," I answered carefully. "You remembered my heart, didn't you? I can't drink. You were there when the doctor said it." I let the silence hang, watching. His lips twitched, the smallest flicker of irritation. He turned away, poured himself a glass of water from a pitcher that gleamed like crystal. His movements were deliberate, too controlled, like a man playing at calm while a storm swirled underneath. I asked lightly, "How did you know it was Margaret who had it?" "I only mentioned I passed it along." My voice sounded steady, but inside my ribs my heart drummed like a fist against the door. He paused, hand on the pitcher, just long enough for the truth to surface. Then he lifted the glass, took a sip, and set it down too carefully. "Lucky guess," he said at last, without looking at me. His voice was wrong, too smooth, too practiced. The silence before it told me more than the words after. He knew. He had always known. I reached into my purse, pressing the button on the recorder with my fingertip, keeping my eyes on him so he wouldn't see the movement. "Margaret's in the hospital," I said softly. "The doctors say poison." His face remained still, but the glass trembled in his hand, a ripple disturbing the water inside. He recovered quickly, setting it down again, his eyes narrowing just enough to betray him. "That's terrible," he said, but there was no weight to it, no shock, no grief, just words arranged in order, hollow as his house. I leaned forward slightly, my voice low. "Did you put something in that bottle, Daniel?" The question split the air like a blade. For a heartbeat, he said nothing. His jaw tightened, his eyes fixed on the empty space over my shoulder, and the silence thickened until it felt like the walls themselves were listening. That silence was louder than any denial could have been. It pressed down on me, filled the room, burned into my chest. He didn't answer, because to answer would have required a lie, and lies leave trails. Instead, he let the silence speak. I held his gaze, though my hands shook against my purse. Every instinct in me wanted to shout, to demand, to claw the truth from him, but I stayed still. The recorder was running, And silence can be evidence when it falls in the right place. At last, he rose, his smile returning, brittle and cold. "I think we're done here," he said, his voice clipped, final. I nodded once, turned, and walked to the door. My legs felt heavy, but my resolve had sharpened. The tape in my purse held more truth than I had dared hope. Not words, but absence. Not denial, but silence. And silence, when it came from Daniel, was more damning than confession. I walked into the precinct with the weight of two objects that no mother should ever carry against her chest. A jar of poisoned whiskey and the voice of her son captured on tape. The jar clinked softly inside a padded bag, wrapped in towels like fragile bone, while the recorder in my purse felt heavier than iron. The morning was gray, the kind that leaches color from the world, and the glass doors of the station reflected back a woman I hardly recognized. My face was pale, lined with exhaustion, but my eyes carried steel. I had come here to place my son's silence in the hands of the law. Detective Reyes met me in a cramped office off the main hall, a space that smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. He was a man built for patience, steady eyes beneath thick brows, his tie loosened as though formality only slowed him down. When I set the bag and recorder on his desk, I saw the flicker in his gaze, the recognition that what I was handing him was not rumor or suspicion but evidence. He opened the bag with careful hands, lifting the jar so the amber liquid caught the thin light filtering through the blinds. He turned it slowly, his face unreadable. "This is the sample," I said quietly, my voice steady though my stomach twisted. "And this," I slid the recorder across the desk. He didn't answer when I asked him. He let the silence speak. Reyes nodded once, setting the jar down gently. He pressed the recorder's play button, and Daniel's voice filled the room, smooth at first, then faltering, then absent altogether. We listened to that pause stretch like wire-pulled taut, every second damning him more than words ever could. When the recording clicked off, the detective leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. "You've done the right thing bringing this to me," he said. His tone was firm, without pity, as though he knew pity would shatter me. "But you need to understand what comes next." I forced myself to meet his eyes. "Tell me." "Don't talk to your son again," he said. "Not a word. Not about this. Not about anything. If he calls, let it go to voicemail. If he shows up, you don't engage. Distance yourself. Every word between you can be twisted. Every silence can be filled with his story instead of yours." I nodded slowly, though the thought hollowed me out. A mother told to treat her son like a stranger at the door. Still, I knew he was right. Reyes leaned forward, his voice lowering. "Document everything. Keep a record. Times, dates, words, even things that feel small, especially those. Memory fades, but paper doesn't. And when you do speak, if you're forced, keep your responses shorter than his questions. Don't let him lead you down roads he builds. Answer what's asked, nothing more. Understood?" "Yes," I whispered. He studied me, as if measuring whether I could bear the weight of his instructions. At last, he pushed the recorder back toward me. "Keep a copy. Protect yourself." Then, he rose, carrying the jar away with a careful grip, leaving me with the knowledge that what had once been a gift was now evidence tagged and logged, its contents deadly as a bullet. When I returned home, the house felt emptier than before. The chair in the kitchen corner seemed to sag under invisible weight, the walls listening to secrets they should never have heard. I sat at the table with a stack of index cards, a pen balanced in my fingers. The detective's words circled in my head. Document everything. I drew 2 columns across the first card. On the left, I wrote, what I know. On the right, what I can prove. The pen shook slightly, but the ink flowed steady. I began to fill them in. What I know. Daniel sent the bottle. His handwriting was on the package. He called, asked if I had tried it. When I said I gave it to Margaret, he paused. Margaret drank and collapsed. The hospital suspect's poison. I found a vial in my trash. I saved a jar untouched. Dr. Holt confirmed white snakeroot toxin. I confronted him. He revealed knowledge he shouldn't have had. His silence was more than silence. It was guilt. What I can prove. Handwriting sample on package. Phone records of his call. jar with confirmed toxin, vial residue, lab report, recorder with his words and his lack of them. Card after card, I built the fragile scaffolding of truth, separating suspicion from evidence, grief from fact. Each card was small enough to fit in my hand, but together they formed a ledger of betrayal, a map of a crime that should never have touched a mother's table. By the time the lamp burned low, I had stacked them neatly, edges aligned, my handwriting tight and deliberate. I held the top card, ran my thumb across the words, and felt both the strength and the sorrow of what I was building. I wasn't just writing evidence. I was writing the story of a son who had turned his silence into a weapon, and I knew the pages ahead would cut deeper than any blade. The first voicemail came in the dead of night. My phone lit the room with its cold glow, his voice spilling through the speaker when I pressed it to my ear. Smooth, calm, deliberate. We need to talk. Nothing more. No greeting, no farewell. Just 4 words that carried the weight of a threat disguised as invitation. I replayed it twice, studying every syllable, every pause, the way a hunter studies the snap of a twig. Then another came the next morning, his tone sharper, thinner. Don't make this worse. Worse for whom? He didn't say. Worse than what? He didn't explain. I saved each message, marked the times and dates on my index cards, the ink cutting into the paper with a harder hand than usual. His silence had once been his weapon. Now he used words like knives, short, efficient, meant to bleed without warning. The house grew smaller with each day, the walls tightening as though they knew he had spoken through them. I checked my locks 3 times before bed, tested the windows, walked the perimeter with a flashlight clutched in my hand like a weapon I barely trusted. I was cautious, not paranoid, or so I told myself. But caution turned to dread the morning I pulled the trash bag from under the sink. I tied it as always, but when I stepped outside, I noticed the knot had already been loosened. The bag was lighter than it should have been. My heart jolted. I knelt on the porch, opened it. Coffee grounds, eggshells, onion skins. But the small glass vial I had found days earlier, was gone. I dug through the refuse with trembling hands, knowing I wouldn't find it, the certainty chilling me before the confirmation. Someone had been inside my house. Someone had taken it back. I stood in my kitchen, breathing shallow, the air pressing in too heavy. My first thought was of the key. Daniel had one, though I hadn't seen him use it in years. A key meant for family dinners and surprise visits. Now a blade turned against me. I ran my hand over the doorframe by habit, and felt the roughness of wood where it should have been smooth. When I crouched closer, the faint scuff marks told their story, metal scraping against the plate, an entry forced but subtle, careful enough to hide from anyone not looking. But I was looking now. I called Reyes. My voice shook only once, at the beginning, then steadied into something colder, something honed. He came within the hour, a young officer trailing him with a camera and notepad. They moved through my kitchen like surgeons, deliberate and precise. Reyes crouched by the doorframe, his hand brushing lightly over the scuff as though reading Braille. "You were right," he said. Someone used a key, forced it, maybe filed down, maybe just worn. Either way, they weren't trying to break in loud. They wanted in quiet. His tone carried no surprise, only confirmation. The officer photographed every angle, each click of the shutter, a reminder that my home was now a crime scene, my walls witnesses. Reyes straightened, his eyes steady on mine. The vial matters. Whoever came back knew you had it. They wanted to erase the trail. I nodded, my mouth too dry for words. My mind went to the index cards stacked neatly on my table, each fact written in my hand. They couldn't take those from me. Not yet. After they left, the house seemed hollower, its silence too large to fill. I sat at the kitchen table, pen in hand, and added another card. What I know. Daniel has a key. The vial is missing. Trash disturbed. Marks on doorframe confirm entry. What I can prove? Police photographs of scuff marks. Officer's report. Missing vial noted. His voicemails saved. Threats preserved in plastic memory. I stacked the card with the others, pressing it flat with my palm. My son had walked through my door without my permission, stripped evidence from my hands, left me with emptiness where proof once lay. He believed he could silence me with missing glass and cryptic words. But each action became another entry in my ledger, another line I would not forget. That night I sat in the dark with every light off, listening. The hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock, the faint creak of settling beams. My heart hammered in rhythm with them all. Every sound felt like intrusion, every silence heavier than the last. When my phone lit again at midnight, another voicemail waiting. I didn't need to play it to know what it said. The words might change, but the meaning never did. He was closing in, and I was documenting his every step. Hospitals have a way of swallowing sound. Even when machines beep steadily and shoes squeak against polished floors, the silence underneath is deeper, heavier. I walked down the corridor with my pulse matching the rhythm of those machines, every step echoing with a dread I couldn't shake. Margaret was alive. That much I had been told over the phone. Stable, they said. But stable in a hospital bed is not the same as safe in her own chair. I braced myself before entering her room. Margaret lay propped up against white pillows, her skin still pale but no longer drained of color. Tubes ran to her arm. Monitors glowed faintly at her bedside. Howard sat close, his large hand folded over hers, his face lined by sleepless hours. When he saw me, he nodded, eyes red but softened with relief. "She's fighting," he whispered. "That's all we can ask." I touched Margaret's hand gently, the warmth of her skin surprising me, proof that she was still tethered here. Her eyes fluttered open briefly, recognition passing through them before exhaustion pulled them closed again. Behind me, Clara shifted in the corner. She looked smaller than I remembered, shoulders hunched, hair tied back in haste, eyes rimmed red not only from worry but something deeper, something heavier. She waited until Howard bent low to adjust the blanket before motioning me toward the hallway. I followed, heart tight. In the corridor, Clara folded her arms across her chest, as if bracing herself against what she was about to release. Her voice was low, urgent. "Alicia, I can't stay quiet anymore. Not after this." She glanced toward her mother's room, then back at me. "Daniel has been different, for months. Secretive, distant, but not in the usual way. I tried to ignore it at first, but then I started noticing things." My breath caught. "What kind of things?" Her eyes darted to the floor, her voice cracking. "The garage. He spends hours out there, door shut, sometimes all night. When I finally went in after he left for work, I found jars, dozens of them. Dried plants, roots, leaves, labeled with initials I didn't recognize. Some marked with numbers. He said it was for teas, natural medicine. But it didn't feel right." She swallowed hard, tears brimming. Then I found printouts. Forums, message boards about extractions, tinctures, distilling toxins from plants. He's in groups that talk about dosage, potency, ways to concentrate them. I didn't understand half of it, but I understood enough to be scared. The hallway seemed to tilt under me. Daniel's voice echoed in my memory. "Did you try the whiskey yet?" I gripped the railing along the wall, steadying myself. "Why didn't you say anything sooner?" My words came out sharper than intended, and I regretted them instantly. Clara flinched, shaking her head. "I thought it was just a phase, a hobby he'd get bored with. He told me I was overreacting, that it was just plants. And her voice broke. He made me feel foolish for even questioning it. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe my husband wasn't capable of something darker. But now my mother is lying in that bed." Her hands trembled as she reached into her bag. She pulled out a laptop, old and worn, edges dented, the surface scuffed. She held it out to me like it was a burden she could no longer carry. This was his before he bought the new one. He doesn't know I kept it. I looked once, just once, and I saw folders with names I didn't recognize. Some locked with passwords, others filled with notes, recipes, experiments. I didn't dare dig further. I was afraid of what I'd find, but I can't hold on to it anymore. "You should have it. Maybe you'll know what to do." I took the laptop slowly, feeling its weight settle into my hands. Cold metal, scratched plastic, a shell filled with answers I both needed and dreaded. Clara's eyes brimmed with tears, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I think he's into something dangerous, Alicia. I think he's been planning this longer than we realize. Please don't let him twist it on me. If he finds out I gave this to you." She trailed off, fear tightening her throat. I touched her arm, steadying her. "You did the right thing," I said, though the words felt too small for the enormity of her betrayal. Her fear. She nodded once, quickly, then pulled away, retreating toward her mother's room, leaving me with the laptop clutched against my chest. As I walked out of the hospital into the sharp air of evening, the city lights blurred against the darkening sky. The weight of the laptop grew heavier with each step, as though it contained not just files and notes, but the remnants of a man I had once called son. The truth had been circling me in fragments, poison in a bottle, silence on a phone, a vial stolen from my trash. Now, in my hands, I carried the missing piece. Proof waited inside this machine, and with it, the certainty that Daniel's darkness was no longer just suspicion. It was fact. When the raid came, it was quiet. No sirens, no spectacle, just unmarked cars rolling into Daniel's neighborhood at dawn. Men and women in plain clothes moving with the certainty of people who already knew what they would find. I stayed back, in the passenger seat of Reyes's car, watching through the windshield as his team worked. My hands were clenched tight in my lap, nails biting my skin, every breath shallow. This was my son's house, his garage, his life being pried open by strangers with gloves and cameras. And yet, I was the one who had placed the first crack in the door. The garage door lifted with a groan, and the dark inside spilled secrets like rot spilling from a wound. I caught glimpses as the officers moved through, their flashlights cutting through the shadows. Shelves lined with jars, each marked with black ink, WSR. The labels read, over and over, WSR, white snake root. My throat closed. They lifted boxes, pulled binders, stacked them on tables, dragged out into the morning air. Pages filled with numbers, dosage trials, notes written in Daniel's heavy hand, drawings of roots circled in red ink, sketches of plants broken down to anatomy, each leaf annotated like a diagram in a textbook. Reyes brought me one notebook himself, opening it on the hood of his car. The pages stank faintly of dried herbs, the ink thick, and there, written at the top of one column, were the initials, M.E., Margaret Ellis, a list of weights, drops, times. Next to it, A.P., my own name reduced to 2 letters, written by the hand I had once taught to shape letters in first grade. My knees weakened, the air leaving me. I gripped the edge of the car, staring at the black strokes that tied me to his experiments, his poison, his intent. This wasn't a theory. It was planned, documented. My life and Margaret's life laid out in dosages like we were trials in some grotesque experiment. Reyes closed the notebook gently, his expression carved from stone. "We have what we need," he said, but his voice was heavy, not triumphant. "Evidence can save, but it cannot mend." By the afternoon, word reached us. Daniel was gone. He had slipped out before the raid, leaving behind his wife's fear, his daughter's absence, his garage of jars and pages. No one had seen him. No trace. It was as though he had dissolved into the cracks of the city. Clara called me that evening, her voice broken, asking if I knew where he had gone. I told her the truth, I didn't, but silence stretched between us, thick with the weight of what she feared as much as I did. He wasn't finished. That night, as the house settled and the world outside fell to darkness, the threat arrived, slipped into my mailbox without a stamp, no envelope, just a folded piece of paper. Inside were 3 photographs, grainy, black and white images of my own home. One showed the back porch where Martin and I once sat, the swing still hanging, though weathered. Another caught the kitchen window, the curtain drawn but the angle sharp enough to remind me that glass is no shield. The last was the front door, the lock gleaming under the flash, scuff marks visible, proof he had been here before, and maybe again since. At the bottom of the photos, scrawled in his hand, the message, "Stop letting them in, or I will." 14 words that chilled me deeper than any silence. My breath caught, the paper trembling in my fingers. He was watching. He had been close enough to lift the camera, to mark me not just as his mother but as his target. I sat at the kitchen table, The photographs spread in front of me under the weak lamplight. The house creaked with its ordinary sounds, but every one of them now carried menace. A drip in the sink became a footstep. A gust at the window became breath on glass. I forced myself to steady my hands, to lift an index card and write, "What I know." Police raided the garage. Jars labeled WSR, dosage notes, notebook with ME and AP, evidence, trials, sketches, tinctures, Daniel missing, photos delivered, message, stop letting them in, or I will. What I can prove. Police reports, seized evidence, photographed notebook, photos in his hand delivered to my door. I stacked the card with the others, pressed my palm flat over them, anchoring myself to the process. It was the only way I could keep from unraveling. Evidence on one side, suspicion on the other, proof from fear, truth from silence. Still, as I sat in the dim glow of my lamp, the photos staring back at me, I felt the walls of my house contract. Daniel was no longer just a shadow in memory. He was here, close enough to see me breathe through glass. And the note wasn't just warning, it was promise. The knock came just after dawn, not at my door but at his. I wasn't there to see it. But Reyes told me later how they approached in silence, how Daniel opened the door as if expecting no one, and how the calm expression slipped from his face the moment he saw the badges. They cuffed him on his own front step, the street still damp from night rain, the neighbors' curtains twitching with curiosity. He didn't fight, not with his body, though Reyes said the look in his eyes was sharper than any blade, as though he believed chains were only temporary. When the news reached me, I sat at the kitchen table, hands folded tight, my index cards stacked beside me. The jar, the vial, the notebook, the photos, all the fragments had built to this moment. And still, I felt no victory, only the hollow sound of inevitability. The evidence was overwhelming. The raid had pulled more from his garage than even I had imagined. Rows of jars marked WSR, each carefully sealed, tinctures stored in brown bottles, notes clipped to their sides, coded pages filled with calculations that spoke of trial and error, dosage and effect. Among the papers, they found one burner phone, its memory clogged with messages. Increased dose. Timing crucial. Not enough last time. Must be stronger. Words that cut deeper than knives. Proof that this wasn't accident or curiosity. It was method. Still, he had a lawyer waiting. Caldwell. A man polished to the point of gleam, with suits that whispered of money and words honed like scalpels. He leaned across the table at the station, his voice smooth, his smile meant to disarm. "Mrs. Parker, you must understand. These notebooks you're describing scribbles. Random notes. My client is a hobbyist, nothing more. Jars of dried plants? Not illegal. Experiments? Amateur? There's no clear intent here. Just fragments you've chosen to interpret in the worst light. Mothers see shadows where sons stand." I sat still, my hands folded in my lap, letting him talk. His words slid across the table like oil, leaving a slick trail meant to make me doubt. I thought of Daniel as a child, bent over his schoolwork, pencil pressing too hard, the grooves of his letters carved into the paper below. That same heavy hand had filled the notebook with columns of numbers, with initials ME, AP marked beside doses. Those weren't scribbles. They were records. His records. I lifted my eyes, my voice steady. "A man who records doses isn't careless. He's committed." Caldwell paused, the smile faltering for a fraction of a second. I pressed on. "Those notebooks are not idle. They're intention. They are evidence, as precise as fingerprints. Scribbles don't name Margaret Ellis. Scribbles don't carry my initials. Scribbles don't measure ounces, don't circle roots, don't mark time of ingestion. This isn't pastime. It's practice." The room held the weight of my words, silence falling thick. Caldwell recovered quickly. Of course he was paid to, but I saw the crack, the moment where the mask slipped and he realized my resolve would not bend. He tried a softer approach, tilting his head, lowering his tone. "You're grieving, Mrs. Parker. You've lost your husband. Your son is distant. Loneliness has a way of sharpening suspicion. You're looking for meaning where there may be none." I held his gaze, unblinking. I'm not lonely, Mr. Caldwell. I'm alive. And that's more than I would be if I had trusted the bottle your client sent me. Margaret nearly lost her life because of it. My son's silence and your words can't erase what the evidence proves. He leaned back, folding his hands, the smile returning, though thinner this time. We'll see, he said. Later, Reyes told me Daniel said almost nothing during questioning. He sat with arms folded, eyes steady, lips curved into the faintest smirk. When shown the notebook, he shrugged. When read the texts from the burner phone, he said only, "People write things they don't mean." He left the rest to Caldwell, who spun every page, every word, into coincidence. But coincidence crumbles under weight, and the weight here was too much to bear. When they walked him past me, escorted between two officers, his eyes met mine. For a moment I searched them, hoping for something: regret, sorrow, even shame. What I saw instead was cold recognition, the gaze of a man who had turned his mother into witness against him. He didn't speak, but his silence was sharper than any insult. I watched as the door closed behind him, the sound echoing down the hall. My chest felt hollow, but my spine stayed straight. Caldwell could call them scribbles. Daniel could hide behind silence. But the truth was already written in ink, in glass, in poison measured out, drop by drop. And I would not look away. Courtrooms smell of polish and old paper, a mixture that clings to the air like a memory no one wants but everyone must breathe. When I walked in, clutching my index cards, though I knew I couldn't use them on the stand, the silence pressed against me heavier than stone. Daniel sat at the defense table, suit crisp, hair combed back, his expression carved from ice. If he saw me, he didn't show it. Beside him, Caldwell leaned forward with that same polished confidence, already turning his pen slowly in his hand like it was a weapon he intended to use. The district attorney opened with precision, voice steady and sharp. She didn't just lay out evidence, she built a story. A mother, betrayed. A bottle, poisoned. A son who had turned trust into a weapon. She gestured toward me once, not with pity but with respect, then toward Margaret, seated pale but steady in the gallery. "This is not just science and evidence," she said. "This is betrayal written in ink and sealed in glass. This is the deliberate targeting of a mother by her own blood." Her words rang out, every syllable echoing in the rafters. Caldwell rose for the defense, his smile smooth as oil. He painted me not as victim but as bitter narrator, weaving a tale of a woman long resentful, her grief for her husband curdling into suspicion of her only son. "She sees shadows where there are none," he told the jury, gesturing toward me with open palms. "She confuses absence with malice, silence with intent. These notebooks? Scribbles? These jars? Harmless experiments. She has built a story out of grief, and the prosecution would have you mistake imagination for evidence." His voice was practiced, his eyes sweeping the jurors like a shepherd counting sheep. Then came the witnesses. Margaret took the stand first, fragile still. Her voice trembled, but her words carried weight. She described that night: the roast dinner, the laughter around the table, the bottle Daniel had sent. "It tasted wrong," she said, her hand gripping the rail of the witness box. "Not like whiskey should. It burned in a way I couldn't name. And then I remember nothing until I woke in the hospital." Her words tightened the air. No one in that room doubted the truth of her collapse, her body's near surrender. Detective Reyes followed. He presented the jar, the vial, the reports from Dr. Holt's lab, every confirmation stamped and signed. He read the texts from the burner phone aloud, his voice steady, each line cutting like a blade. "Increased dose. Not enough last time. Must be stronger." The jury shifted in their seats, the weight of those words undeniable. He laid the notebook on the evidence table, opened to the page where me and AP were scrawled beside measurements. Initials, dosages, trials. This is not scribble. This is record. His eyes met the jury's. No dramatics, just truth. Then it was my turn. I rose, legs steady though my chest ached. I swore the oath, sat in the box, and lifted my gaze to the room. Caldwell's eyes were on me, sharp, waiting to pounce. The DA asked her questions with care, guiding me through each step. I spoke of the package, the handwriting I had known since childhood, the card with only 2 words, "Happy birthday." I told of the phone call, Daniel asking if I had tried the whiskey, the pause that followed when I said I had given it away. I spoke of the vial in my trash, the missing evidence, the photographs slid into my mailbox with his threats scrawled across them. When Caldwell rose, his questions came sharp, designed to cut. "Mrs. Parker, isn't it true you've been estranged from your son for years?" "Yes." "Isn't it true you resented his distance?" "Yes." "Isn't it possible your grief has colored your judgment?" "No." My answers were short, just as Reyes had instructed, shorter than his questions, leaving him no room to twist. "Still," he pressed, painting me as embittered, lonely, clinging to suspicion. At last, the DA asked one final question. "Mrs. Parker, in your own words, how did you view the bottle your son sent you?" I drew a breath, the weight of the room pressing against my ribs. I looked at the jury, at their eyes searching mine. My voice did not shake. "That bottle was never a gift. It was a warning." The words hung there, steady, undeniable, heavier than any evidence spread across the tables. The silence that followed was different from every pause before. Not empty, not doubtful. It was the kind of silence that acknowledged truth. Even Caldwell, with all his polish, could not scrub those words from the air. Daniel looked at me then, for the first time in the trial. His eyes were cold, but there was a flicker beneath them, the barest recognition that the bond between us had been severed not by distance, but by his own hand. The jury filed back into the room with the kind of silence that breaks skin. 12 faces, worn by hours of testimony, carrying the weight of decisions that would alter the course of 2 lives, mine and Daniel's. My breath caught in my chest, my hands pressed together so tightly in my lap that my knuckles blanched. Across the room, Daniel sat straight, arms folded, jaw set. Caldwell leaned toward him, whispering something, but my son didn't turn his head. His eyes were on me. They hadn't wavered since the judge called the jury in. The DA's final blow had been the text message. Reyes read it aloud, his voice stripped of any inflection, letting the words strike bare. "Make sure she finishes it. With her heart, it won't take much." The room had gone still then, as if no one dared breathe. The words needed no interpretation. They were intent carved into glass, cruelty disguised as calculation. The jurors had stared down at their notepads, some scribbling, others frozen, but I saw it land in their faces. There was no mistaking what it meant. Now, as the foreman stood, paper trembling slightly in his hand, I braced myself. My heart hammered so loudly I feared the sound would drown out the verdict. "On the charge of attempted murder," he read, "we find the defendant guilty." The word rang like a bell tolling through the room. For a moment, I couldn't move. My lungs seized, my body suspended between relief and devastation. Guilty. A word that meant justice, and yet one that shattered what little bond still tied me to the man at the defense table. Caldwell's face hardened, his polished composure cracking at the edges. Daniel didn't flinch. He simply sat, eyes fixed on me, his face cold as stone. The judge's voice carried next, pronouncing sentence: 25 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15. The gavel struck once, sharp, final, a sound that split my world in two. A son condemned, a mother left with the wreckage of what justice demands. I wanted to cry, but no tears came. My body was a vessel emptied by fire, hollow but still standing. Margaret, seated behind me, reached forward, her hand brushing my shoulder in quiet solidarity. Clara sobbed softly in the gallery, torn between loyalty to her mother and the ruin of her husband. I kept my eyes forward, on the bench, unwilling to look back, afraid that if I did, I would crumble. The bailiffs moved toward Daniel. The clink of cuffs against his wrists echoed, metal on bone. Still he did not resist. Still he did not bow his head. As they led him past me, his gaze locked with mine. For a moment, I searched for the boy I had raised, the child whose laughter once filled my yard. But there was nothing of him left, only the man who had measured dosages, circled routes, sent poison wrapped as a gift. He leaned just enough to let the words carry, his voice low but sharp. "This isn't the last chapter." His eyes held mine, steady, cold, a promise more than a threat. I felt it settle in my chest like ice. The officers pulled him away, through the side door, the sound of chains fading into distance. The room emptied slowly, voices hushed, footsteps muffled, but I remained seated for a long time, staring at the space where he had stood. Justice had been spoken, written into record, but peace did not follow. It never does. When I finally rose, my legs felt weak, the weight of the sentence pressing down as heavily as if I were the one behind bars. 25 years, 15, with parole. Numbers that marked the future in increments, but not the damage already carved. I stepped outside into the late afternoon light, the courthouse steps stretching down like a descent into another life. The sky was sharp blue, but it carried no comfort. Reporters murmured at the edges, cameras clicking, but their questions blurred into noise. I moved past them, each step heavier than the last, clutching the truth to myself like a wound. My son was guilty. My son was gone. And his last words lingered in the air, a shadow I could not shake. This isn't the last chapter. I walked to the street, the city alive around me, and felt the fracture widen inside my chest. Justice had been delivered, but in its wake remained only silence, heavier than any verdict could bear. Justice feels nothing like peace. People speak as if the two are kin, as if the gavel's strike carries balm as well as verdict. But when the judge's voice fades and the chains rattle down the hallway, you are left alone with the echo of what you've lost. That echo lingers. It seeps into your skin. I learned quickly that justice is an agreement with the law, not a healing of the soul. Daniel was gone, delivered into the custody of the state, and yet he was everywhere. His handwriting lived in the folds of my memory. The 2 words he'd written on that card, "Happy Birthday," burned into me like a brand. Every silence in my house reminded me of his pause on the phone. Every knock at the door carried the weight of his final words. This isn't the last chapter. The jury's verdict had ended the trial, but it had not ended the son I once raised, the boy whose laughter I could still hear if I let my mind slip far enough back. Margaret recovered slowly. I visited her at home weeks after the trial, finding her bundled in a shawl, her voice thin but steady. She smiled at me with a kind of bravery I envied. Howard hovered close, his care fierce, as though he might guard her body from betrayal with the strength of his presence. Clara sat at the table with us, eyes rimmed red, her fingers twisting the hem of her sleeve. She was supportive, yes, but broken too, caught between the relief of her mother's survival and the devastation of her husband's conviction. I saw in her the splintering of a life loyalty shattered, family torn in two. She told me softly, "I don't blame you." I wanted to believe her, but the words were a gift I could not unwrap. At home, I kept the index cards in a neat stack, but I could no longer bear to look at them. Each one was evidence, yes, but also scar. What I knew, what I could prove, what I had lost. The jar, the photographs, the notebook, all tagged and sealed by the police, were returned to me eventually, or at least the copies they didn't need. They arrived in a plain box, unmarked, as though the contents did not burn with memory. I bought a fireproof box from a hardware store. Black steel, heavy lid, a lock that clicked sharp. One by one, I placed the artifacts inside. The recorder with his silence captured forever. The letters WSR scrawled on labels, the photographs of my house, the ink of his warning. I slid the stack of index cards in last, my handwriting precise, each line carved from nights of fear. When the lid closed, I felt a strange finality, as though I had performed a ritual. It was not burial, not forgiveness, but survival. A way to contain the poison, to keep it from spilling again into my life. Sometimes, late at night, I would sit at the kitchen table with the box near my feet, the hum of the refrigerator steady in the background, and I would imagine fire sweeping through the house. The flames would devour curtains, chairs, photographs, but the box would remain, sealed, holding the record of betrayal long after I was gone. That thought comforted me in a grim way. The truth would outlive me. Daniel's silence, his notes, His threats, they would be preserved, undeniable, untouched by time. Yet none of it brought peace. Peace is soft, gentle, a balm. What I carried was sharp, unyielding. I had condemned my own son, spoken against him, watched the law deliver its sentence. And though it was right, though it was necessary, it tore through me with every breath. A mother's love does not vanish with a verdict. It twists instead, turning into something darker, a scar that never fully heals. In quiet moments, I found myself remembering Daniel as a boy, mud on his shoes, his hand small in mine, his laughter carried on the wind. I would let the memory rise, let it pierce me, and then I would fold it back down again, pressing it away like the evidence in the box. Justice had kept me alive, but peace remained out of reach, waiting somewhere I had not yet found. The scars are permanent. I know that now. They are the price of truth, the cost of survival. I can live with them, but I cannot erase them. And when I close my eyes at night, sometimes I see the fireproof box in the dark, heavy and silent, and I know it is not just holding evidence, it is holding me. The garden swing had sat broken for years, its chain rusted, one plank splintered, the wood grayed with weather. I passed it each morning on my way to the mailbox, telling myself I'd fix it someday, though the truth was simpler. I couldn't bear to. Too many evenings had been spent there, Martin beside me, a glass of whiskey in his hand, laughter soft and steady as the swing rocked us into dusk. After he was gone, the silence on that seat was too sharp. And then life turned darker. Daniel's absence stretching into something more sinister, until I couldn't imagine sitting there at all. But now, after the trial, after the verdict, after the fireproof box locked shut in my closet, the swing called to me again, not with comfort, but with challenge. One Saturday, I carried the tools out, the air sharp with early spring. I set the swing on its side, brushed away the cobwebs, and sanded the wood until my hands ached. The old paint flaked beneath my touch, revealing pale grain beneath. Each stroke of sandpaper felt like stripping back the years, exposing what had been hidden, what could still be salvaged. I replaced the broken plank, tightened the bolts, oiled the rusted chain until it gleamed faintly in the sunlight. By afternoon, the swing stood straight again, sturdy, as if waiting. I brewed a cup of tea, the steam curling upward in soft tendrils. The smell was warm, earthy, nothing like the sharp bite of whiskey that used to linger in our evenings. My doctor's voice echoed faintly in memory, no alcohol, not with the heart, and I thought of the irony, how that same heart had become Daniel's target. The tea felt right, a choice, a declaration that bitterness would not be the drink I carried into the rest of my life. When I lowered myself onto the swing, the chain creaked softly, but the seat held firm. I leaned back, felt the boards beneath me steady, and let the motion rock me forward, then back, a rhythm older than grief. The garden around me hummed with the quiet persistence of life. Birds flitting through the trees, bees tracing invisible lines through the air, the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. The world, I realized, did not pause for verdicts. It carried on. I held the mug in both hands, letting its heat seep into my skin. I thought of Margaret, her body slowly reclaiming strength, her voice steadier with each call. I thought of Clara, fractured but still reaching out, still trying to stitch together something whole from what Daniel had left in ruins. And I thought of Daniel himself, the silence in his eyes, the final words he had spoken before they led him away. This isn't the last chapter. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps his shadow would linger, his anger echo through bars, his memory pressing always at the edges of my peace. But here, in this moment, on this swing, I felt the beginnings of something steadier than fear. The past was not erased. My husband's absence still ached. My son's betrayal still bled. But the swing moved forward, then back, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine the future not as a place of dread, but as a place to build. Peace would not arrive on its own. It would not descend like a verdict or be handed to me in a courtroom. It would be built plank by plank, day by day, choice by choice. I sipped the tea, the warmth settling into me. The bitterness of whiskey was a memory now, a taste tied to nights long gone. This drink carried no weight of poison, no echo of betrayal, only quiet, only warmth. The sun lowered itself slowly into the horizon, the light spilling across the garden, painting everything gold. I closed my eyes and let the swing carry me, forward and back, the rhythm steady as breath. In that motion, I felt the faintest flicker of peace. Not complete, not permanent, but present. Enough to hold on to. Justice had been delivered in the courtroom, cold and heavy, a shield more than a salve. But here, on the swing I had rebuilt with my own hands, tea warming my palms, I understood what remained. Justice kept me alive. Peace I'll have to build myself, one quiet afternoon at a time.